Hello and welcome to Your Band Sucks at Business, a podcast on the business of running a band. My name is Malcolm Owenflood. I'm here with my co-host, Marcus Manhas. And today, our guest is a record producer, podcaster, author of the book Get More Fans and the book Processing Creativity, and the creator of the YouTube channel Muse Formation. Please welcome the one and only Jesse Cannon. How you doing, Jesse?
I'm great. I'm so psyched to be here.
Awesome, man. Yeah, we're really stoked to have you on as well. I've heard you on like a ton of podcasts, and then I also saw you speak at the URM Summit in Vegas.
Nice.
I was going to say last year, but that's already 2 years ago now.
Oh, wow, that's depressing.
Yeah.
the before time and all the fun we used to have, it hurts.
Yeah, I think, and like a recording summit in Vegas is a very good definition of a before time. There's nothing like that going on anymore.
Oh yeah, that's ultimate
100%.
Right on. So I'm really glad we could have you on, man, because your YouTube channel, Muse Formation, which, by the way, listeners, if you haven't checked that out already, you absolutely have to. It's incredibly informative. You are a very investigative person. I'm getting from everything I've found of you. You do a lot of research, it seems, and track down the reasons why you're making suggestions. Unlike Marcus and I, we just speculate.
We're gamblers.
We're what's the word? Anecdotal. We're like, this worked for us. But yeah, so like just recently, in advance of this episode, I was digging into some of your episodes on like Spotify and 2020 and 2021. And there's a lot of stuff I didn't know there. And I feel like that's something our audience would love to hear more about. And yeah, I think that's probably a good place for us to jump into things, is just maybe start talking about what the modern musician's strategy should be when we're going into releasing music as an artist in 2021, and your thoughts on that.
Yeah, totally. This is what I'm like super passionate about right now, and it's what I talk about so much on there. So it seems like every musician has the memo that Spotify is like that thing that musicians love, which is like you could do a very little work and then you get a huge reward, because after 20-something years of working with musicians, boy, do I know that is what they love more than anything. It's like, oh, I didn't do much? Great. I get a big reward? Great. So, but the funny thing is what Spotify wants from that, and it actually, like, one of my more popular videos about Spotify, and I have probably like 10, is Spotify tells you everything it wants you to do to help you, and yet still no one pays any attention. And so what I'm sure the listener now is thinking, what does Spotify tell us? Well, they want you to submit to that editorial playlist in advance. They want you to take time and make a good one. And they don't want, like there's this big thing, and this is a lot of what I've been talking about on my channel, is people are just so confused on two poles of the end of how much music they should be releasing. So many people are like, I grew up with the Foo Fighters. They put out a record every 2 years. It's like, yeah, you're not the Foo Fighters. That's not who you should be imitating. Why aren't you imitating people who've gained a fan base in the last 30 years, 20 years, however long that's been? Right. And then the other side of it is then people see like an artist like Russ, who is like releasing music every single week on his way up. And it's like, well, Spotify doesn't seem to like that. So there is a thing that, like, sure, writing a song every week or more than one song a week is like some of the best discipline you can have. But uploading all of that to Spotify does not make Spotify's algorithm happy.
Right.
And so I discuss a lot of things around that like, well, if you do want to get feedback and find your voice in public and find creators in public, like maybe you should be doing that on SoundCloud and Bandcamp, but then only uploading the best to Spotify, because Spotify does not want you submitting a song more than every 28 days or so. If you're going to try to get into Release Radar and have the algorithm do all that it can help you, because what a lot of people don't get is, like, one, those playlists are a huge opportunity, but the other opportunities is as you're accumulating followers on Spotify, that you get put in more Release Radar playlists and you get playlisted more from the algorithm, which helps you spread, and is why you see such, like we all know when we talk to musicians these days, it's like, what do they get mad about? They're like, I can't believe that person has so many fans. They have been working long. It's like, oh my God, that they got their second song blew up like this. It's like, well, that's what algorithms can do now, but you have to do the right things to do them.
Right. Yeah. We got very lucky with the playlist gods with our Band of Rascals. We're still lucky. Like we haven't done a show in 2 years and and it's still just ticking away, which is awesome. But I wonder, because we didn't know anything when we released our music, especially our first album, which is still doing well on there. But we did put a lot of time into our release plan always. So like we probably uploaded it months and months in advance before it actually went live on Spotify. So I wonder if we like by accident hit some of the marks. Maybe.
Like with our first album?
Yeah, with our first album, I mean, yeah.
Well, I feel like our first album was actually like it was right at the beginning of streaming, really. Like it wasn't really as much of a focus when we released that first album at all. The second one I would say was different because we were working with our management team. That was definitely planned out. But yeah, I don't know. The first one, it almost seems like maybe it was a bit of dumb luck.
Yeah.
But with how we came into the infancy of Spotify, you know, something just worked. I don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
It's kind of strange.
And that is the thing, but we'd all like to rely a little less on luck and rely a little bit more on actual intentionality and everything.
Exactly. And it is such, like, I just trying to think what our band's kind of trajectory would have been if we hadn't had that luck. It probably would have been a tougher grind for us because our numbers were pretty good pretty early in our career there. So I think it was luck for us maybe, but if I was to try and do it again, I would really care about trying to make that happen again because it was awesome.
Yeah.
I want to hijack this for a quick second
Sure.
and go controversial. Jesse, I'm really curious what your thoughts are on the Spotify is evil, people shouldn't support it position that you see floating around Facebook sometimes.
You see that all the time now.
All the time.
So I think it was 4 or 5 years ago, actually like worked really hard and put out for free a whole plan on how to actually do a Spotify competitor. And I realized that, you know, much like those people who tried to overthrow the U.S. government the other day, that you're trying to fight a force that you were a little too foolish to understand the whole complication of. I do think Spotify is evil. I also pay $10 a month to Spotify, and it's the only place I listen to music because I only listen to new music. And I'm streaming new artists all day, and it's evil, and it's not the best answer, and I do think there should be a competitor. I unfortunately think the constructs of the music business are way, way, way too complicated to overthrow it in its present state. And I worked really hard on it. I regard myself as a pretty smart person, but when you see the evil of it, and I will make a video on this, and I've made a podcast I can give you guys on this when I actually did it, is, you know, most people don't realize, to give the TLDR, that what Spotify actually does is technically not really legal under the parameters set forth because we have to remember U.S. Congress actually makes laws on royalties. And the major labels and all the things have waived a lot of the rights they have done to allow Spotify and the other streaming sites to act the way they act. And, you know, and there's tons of really weird collusion. Like, you know, every major label had money invested in Spotify. Some of them withdrew. And the fact is it allows evil and my new favorite word, fuckery, to go on. And, you know, it's not good, but it's the only game in town. And the other thing, so my job until COVID hit was I worked at Atlantic Electra doing catalog podcast marketing type stuff. And one of the things we'd see is how much a difference it makes to artists of what streaming does to monetize back catalog and how many nice things it is. And when you're one of the winners, it's great, but really the benefits should be far better, and there's a whole legal collusion. But it's the only answer we have now that will monetize, and I think anything else actually is hurtful. But we do have to have a reckoning point with when these services start being really profitable. And I say this with the hesitance that Apple's the most profitable corporation in the history of capitalism. We do have to start having a thing where we have a very big discussions to the society about what creators contribute to our society versus what these fucking tech bro assholes contribute, which I think you could hear by the tone of my voice. I don't have a lot of good words to say.
Right. But I think despite all that, you and us, we're very, I think I can speak for you in this anyways, but we're very pro that artists should be using this service as a tool to the best of their ability anyways. And that's so much about what you're about, it seems, on your YouTube is figuring out how to do that most effectively.
In just about any part of life, I don't really like the rules. I grew up as a very punk guy. I manage a band that is all about destroying the government. I don't like the rules, but I also play within them. There's a reason I'm a clean-cut looking guy, not looking like a dumpster diving crust punk like my politics are.
Yeah. It's interesting, though, because I feel the same way about it. I mean, you don't have to necessarily agree with the politics of Spotify or any of these streaming services to know that you need to utilize them. I mean, it's the reality. This is where, like you said about finding new or listening to new music on Spotify and paying $10 a month. I do the same thing. Malcolm does the same thing. That's where I find music. Like, that's the reality of it. I'm not going and hunting for used CDs, trying to find bands trying to thwart their CDs on the street. Like, that's where it lives. That's where I discover music. And I think I can speak for a large majority of people. That's where they discover their music. So I think it's in a band's best interest to just, you're not going to be the one who changes the system. You kind of just need to utilize the tools when they're there. So yeah, I'm very pro Spotify, even though I think that they're also evil.
Yeah, and I'll even take it a step further. Where I discover and consume most of my music is actually YouTube as well, since when I come home at night, I sit down and I plunk down some YouTube and I hit play on some music a lot of the time. And YouTube gives even worse royalty. But also, they have rules they like to play by. And like part of what I talk about on the channel too is that Spotify and YouTube have different algorithms, and they're, the release strategy I talk about a lot is to harness both of them and do what's right for both of them, and so that you can allow both of them to help you grow. Right.
You got to play. I mean, if you want to play, right? Like we were a rock band. We wanted to tour the world, right? So it was, how else were we going to get people to hear our music as like an indie band in Canada, in a small town, Cobble Hill, Canada, right? Like there was it was the perfect tool for us. And I think people might want to think about that a little bit now, in that there's no touring, right? Yeah. So if you want people outside of your friend group that you're Facebook chatting with to hear your music, these are the only tools.
So it's 100% right. And especially, and even too, like, in the live music arena, like taking the percentages off of merch on touring bands, it makes me want to burn people's fucking houses down.
Yeah.
It's fucking disgusting. It is a disgusting fucking practice. It's predatory. And, if I see Live Nation go out of business, I'm going to be dancing in the streets.
I remember the first time we had that. It was awful. I was so surprised when they were like, "Oh, we need our percentage." I was like, I didn't even keep track of how much we sold at this point of our band. Like,
yeah. So, they want their cut, and you're like, well, for what? Like, for giving me this table to put my fucking T-shirt on? Like, that doesn't.
Craziness.
Anyway,
but again, it is the way it is in some situations, and I bet if we read the contract we signed, he would have known.
That's always a bad sentence. I bet if we read that contract we signed.
Yeah.
Well, let's circle back to Spotify and YouTube. Like, I think we can kind of
I can tie this together. So Spotify, because it only wants you to put out that song every 30 days or so. And then if we really talk about people's attention spans, and I'm lucky enough that I get to be paid to study things and watch patterns, and, I'm mostly talk to people all day who do these type of things and are watching things. What we tend to find is that people's attention spans are always changing. Like, we all know songs are getting shorter, things like that. But what we see is this kind of golden mark where, like, about every 2 months is the, like, stimulus point for people about how often an artist is releasing a song where we still feel like it's special. So, but YouTube, the problem is it wants you to upload all the time. I mean, YouTube's algorithm just really, the sweet spot seems to be somewhere between 2 times a week to every 2 weeks. So what I suggest then to make YouTube happy is that you release a single screen video then a lyric video. And, people are like, oh my God, that's so much work. I'm like, making a single screen video in DaVinci Resolve is maybe 6 minutes tops. And a lyric video, we should not be getting crazy like emo scene bands did 10 years ago and making them zoom in and out and making it a college kid's dissertation on what motion graphics should be like in the future. It should just simply be a way to present lyrics and give some deeper bonding, because really what we're trying to do all day is build deeper relationships with listeners and let them bond with those lyrics a little bit more, and then put out a music video. And then I get a lot of pushback. What the fuck do you mean a music video? They have to be so polished. It's like, I love pointing to that. We are undergoing a very big reshaping of what music videos are because of COVID, and that most people have to do it. I mean, I know you guys had a Spirit Box in this podcast. I really liked that episode, and I watched one of the videos they've done since quarantine, and you could see how bare bones it was, that it wasn't a huge crew. It's one person at a time in a shot, and you're seeing all these things. And now we're in an era where you can make music videos that are effective on very small sets and very small budgets, and people understand it because we're used to that content. So basically what I'm saying is all these people are complaining about that. I have no time for it.
Yeah. I was like, yep, that's about it, isn't it? There's one thing that I think is hard to define sometimes, is like the good enough point. And it's almost one of those things that, like, sometimes I'm like, maybe some people have it and some people don't. This ability to just gauge that this is actually good. And you see it in, like, I see it in recordings. Like, again, a side effect of COVID is that a lot of bands are recording themselves now, much more so than pre-COVID, and sending me tracks to mix. And some people totally get it. They're like, this is good enough. It might need a little love. But I know I pulled it off too. I got past the bar, right? Be this tall to ride. And some people are so unaware that they're not even close to that bar. And I'm like, whoa, like, this won't work, man. Yeah. It's like, is that just something we have to develop? I don't know. But it's the same for music videos. You see some DIY music videos, you don't think twice. You just watch it and you're like, that was cool, or whatever. You think about it, but you're not critiquing the quality of it. It's somehow works. But then other times it doesn't.
There's so many ways you can go about a music video too, right? Like, if you want to go for a 4K or 6K or something super polished, like high budget looking music video, but you don't have the resources and it's COVID. I mean, you can also make something that can have the same emotional impact, but do it yourself, right? I mean, I think it depends on what your goal. Like, if I had my DSLR from like 5 years ago and I tried to make like a really high budget looking music video, it would fail. It would be awful. But you don't have to do that. I mean, there's so many different options now. And we've seen, look at single art and album art and music videos these days. Like, it's almost like lo-fi. Right. Like, that's kind of the goal for a lot of this stuff. That excuse of not having the resources, it doesn't really exist anymore.
I think that there's a funny thing too, that like what people tend to not realize is like, because, I don't fault musicians for this, actually. It's like when you have a conversation with a lot of the people who are managers and A&R and stuff like that, is like they love the musicians who are self-starters and figure out how to make things work on a really low budget. The problem solving of figuring out how to make things work is the skill that you need to have that impresses all the people who you would work with, who can really help you. And it's that funny thing of like, it really is like an attitude thing of just, I don't got a lot to work with. Let's figure out how we still get something that works with the limitations we're given. And that is, when I wrote that book on creativity, it's like, I really learned that wasn't just music, that is everything that you see. Most of the people who've done things had crazy limitations and usually weren't even as well funded as some of the competitors, is one of the most common traits of innovation and doing it well. And it is that effort. And a lot of people don't like to hear that because that means they're the problem, not the world.
Right. Yeah. You can't blame your tools at that point.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Figuring out how to take bad circumstances, not necessarily bad, but limiting circumstances, and do the best you can with them is, like you said, it's not just music. It's everything. It's business. That's what we talk about every week.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're talking every 2 months is a sweet spot for Spotify, and then more frequently by kind of essentially you're doubling up on releases onto YouTube, right? You're taking one thing and splitting it into different tiers to drip content out on YouTube. That's really cool.
Yeah, and so one of the things I talk about too is that like then what we see is that if like let's say the song is doing really well, what do you see major label acts do when a song is doing really well? Is all of a sudden you see that version that has a feature from somebody, or you see the remix, or you see the piano version or the stripped down version. Well, maybe that comes out after 6 weeks and you keep promoting it. You know, the other thing I think that's really interesting happening now too, alternate version of the video. I pointed, I guess I actually didn't tape that video yet, but one of my future videos, I point to like the band Water Parks. They put out a really cool music video. The song's doing great. They made a pop-up video version of it that was literally just overlaying some bubbles with more context on the video. Doing things that can sustain when a song is actually catching fire is like the biggest mistake DIY bands don't get that every major label gets. Like a major label is watching those, and I should also say big indies, they're watching the analytics. They're saying, oh, this song's doing great. How do we put more fuel in the fire? And you might be discussing that every day for 5 days, like of the week of like, you're throwing ideas around how to put more fuel in that fire. And I think so many of the reasons that when you see bands and artists not level up is like, instead of putting fuel on the fire, they sit back, they do nothing, and they're just like, oh, well, we'll put out that other song that we planned on doing, or maybe we'll wait 6 months and write a really great song. That's what people are on. It's like, no. The other thing we're forgetting is we now live in a society that needs consistent, sustained promotion. Everybody is so used to being delivered content on a regular basis, whether it's YouTube to podcast, to just TV shows that come out every week, that we are now all trained and we lose track of what we're building relationships with if it's 6 months in between our dosage of the drug we're looking for.
Right. Yeah, I think I love that because in general, I would say it's cheaper to continue to promote a song than it is to make a brand new one and start all over again. And what do you see a lot of bands do is not do that. They just record a song, plop it on to Spotify, not even do a music video, and then like, okay, I guess we need to record another song. And it's like recording the song could be the most expensive part of the process a lot of the time, right?
One would hope.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's the most important.
Yeah.
So yeah, a huge into that, like spreading it out. It's there's a sales term where it's cheaper to retain a client than it is to get a new one, you know, like through advertising dollars or time spent reaching out to people. And the same is true, I think, in marketing. It's going to be cheaper to try and sustain that product, especially if there's some momentum behind it, because it only gets easier then, rather than just, you know, dumping it and starting all over again and hoping the next one takes off.
Yeah, and what I think people miss too is that like there's two sides to this. Like one, what I talk about in like my book on creativity is the thing most people miss about music is a mood altering drug, but it also has a tolerance. So what I mean by that, since it sounds real fucking hippy dippy, is that like when we put on a song, it's actually trying to feel a different way than we're feeling right now. So, but what's interesting though is that many artists make a mood that is not easy for the listener to find all the time. Now, if you're into trap right now, you can probably find about 9,000 artists who can make that mood pretty much what you're used to. But for a lot of other people, that mood is harder to come by. And so the problem then becomes is if you're not giving somebody that mood on a semi-regular basis, they're running around, they're looking for it, they're making other relationships with other people, and they're slowly forgetting about you and not looking to you to solve that problem. But whereas if you're consistent, and especially since the way promotion and attentions work in the society, releasing those songs every 2 months makes it so that people build a relationship, they get invested with you because they're turning to you to change their life and their mood on a regular basis. And that is a deep bond. That's nearly the same bond as friendship. And that's why you see so many people be so obsessive over musicians. It's a crazy, crazy thing. Like I am a 43-year-old man and I may behave like a 23-year-old most of the time, but my relationship with music is that thing of like, the 1975 spent a whole year without giving me their dose now, and I'm freaking the fuck out. I'm like, I want that emotion again. And I'm like, where is my fucking hit, buddy? And like, I turn to other places. It doesn't hit as hard. And like, that emotion, I think a lot of people underestimate, even though they feel it within themselves, is that like, it's really, really hard to come by. And that's why you see the artists who are dedicated to really doing this, like, they stick with it. They're putting out a good amount of music. They're doing the things. And yes, as they get more successful, they may take more time to do it. But on the way up, that's what's the formula these days. And it's because of the way our attentions work and the way our bodies get addicted to the mood-altering drug of music.
I can definitely relate to that. Marcus, my immediate thought was Matt Corby. When we first got into him, like the music was already old and there hadn't been anything for ages. Like a couple of years at least. And thankfully he figured it out and started releasing music again. But I was like wanting to email him and be like, what are you doing? You're amazing.
Yeah, for sure. I know it's really interesting. Right. And it's the same. It's the same with his touring schedule though, right? He didn't tour for forever either. And I get that. I mean, that's tough. And he's obviously a really private guy, but yeah, I mean, it was so personal. It's like, hey man, like, come on. It's like a single, a demo. Just give me anything. Like, I haven't had anything in so long. I've listened to those songs so many times. I need something new. And yeah, that it's like a feeling of desperation. Like you really feel like you're going through withdrawals. It's and that connection, as rare, I feel like, as it is for me. If I have that, it's like, I will support that guy with anything he does. Like I'm like one of the 1,000 fans basically. And I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of those out there and people don't realize that. And then that's the thing. They just kind of get lost. And the content also becomes stale for them too, right?
Yes.
They don't want to keep pushing it because they're like, fuck, I've heard this song for the past year before it was even released. Like, yeah, by the time it's released, it's old to them.
Yeah. And I think the other thing we forget is that like when we're deepening these relationships, like the more it is, songs and content are all just reminders to go deeper with a relationship. And they're also new fodder for somebody to talk about. Like when you think about like how teenagers really do interact with music, who are the biggest spreaders of it is, 15 to 24-year-olds are the biggest spreaders of music. And what is it? It's like you're obsessing over things because you don't have much else responsibility to do all the time. So you're like, oh my God, that person changed their hair color. Wow. Oh my God. And like, whereas at like 43, if somebody turned to me like, Matt Healy from the 1975 dyed his hair different, I'd be like, do you have a concussion? Like, why are we talking about this? But like, the thing being though, is every little thing allows you to have your relationship go deeper when people are filling that point in their life with it. And then people talk about that. And then what we want as humans, and this is the whole part of like that, what I think is always so interesting about friendships built on music, is one of the reasons we build so many friendships of music is because that emotion, that where we hear the song and it changes our emotion to another thing, we connect with people who need a similar drug to us. And we want to have the bonds. Like we all think about like how we often get offended when our friend who likes so many of the same artists as us doesn't like it. That's because you're not building the relationship with that person. It's the same reason that like you get in a relationship fight when like, you both don't want to do the same thing. And you're both passionate about you're passionate about one thing and the other person's not feeling so passionate about it. It becomes a conflict. It's the same thing when you're saying, oh man, I can't stop thinking about that thing. And the person's like, I don't like them. All of a sudden it's a hurtful thing. And that's how music discovery is a thing, is that person talks about it. And then eventually you give it a third chance. Like I know for me, most of my favorite artists are people I give a second or a third chance to. And then I'm like, oh wow, this is amazing. Like I just had that happen recently with this artist Breakins, like where like I had 5 people tell me like, you got to listen to this. It's great. I'm like, we're not feeling this. And now it's like all I listen to all day. And now I have that bond with everybody.
I'm like that with pop music. I'm like metal first is like what I used to be really into. And then I kind of became a rock guy, but metal was always like my sweetheart. And so I'm always like, distorted guitars. If it doesn't have that, I'm not really in. And then like third time hearing Shawn Mendes, I'm like, this is my guilty pleasure. I feel good when I hear this song. Yeah. Our audience is going to leave us now.
I guess I shouldn't talk about how much I love pop then.
Yeah,
I think you're speaking for pretty much everybody, though. It's the thing. I think if people say they don't like pop, they don't understand what pop is, for one, or they're lying, because I love pop. I fucking love it. It's like most of what I listen to these days, to be honest with you, and I unapologetically love it. So it was weird, though, when I was in a rock band, I was like, no, I don't like that. I hate pop, man. But now I'm like, hell yeah, let's go.
Well, I do think it's an interesting thing, because I think pop got better. Like, I would argue that there's very bad eras of pop at times.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And that is the thing, is like we have a lot of good, interesting pop. But like, as somebody who's had a long relationship with pop now, even though I mostly grew up as a punk kid, there's certain eras where I'm like, no, that is not what it was. But then I look at like Kesha TikTok and I'm like, oh, golden era of pop.
That's awesome. This is like, we're going into a pretty artsy conversation here, but that's fine. The same is true for when an artist changes what they do dramatically, and like the feeling gets changed, like inverted even. Artist that I'm really into, named Ben Howard, went from writing like happy songs to really dark and sad songs. And it took me like a year to come around to it. And then now that like first sad album's like my favorite thing he's ever done, kind of thing. It's just interesting. I hadn't really thought about it this way until you kind of educated me on this, Jesse.
Yeah, I've had that a lot with, I'm generally a person who it's always funny, like friends send you that ballad that they're like, oh, I just poured my heart out. I'm like, yeah, I'm not feeling it, buddy. Cause like, I don't like ballads in general. Like, I'm a really happy, smiley, kind of annoyingly cheery person most of the time. I mean, there's a rough exterior, but like, I just don't have that. But then every once in a while, like those artists I'll have that I really love will have those like really sad songs. And then when I actually do have a period where I'm sad and I revisit them, I'm all of a sudden like, oh my God, now I connect with this artist on such a deeper level because I'm finally feeling this emotion. But it is a funny thing too, because like one of my other hot takes is that like I kind of hate records that skip around emotions a little too much. Now I do see the irony of me saying the 1975 is my favorite band when they do that, but they do it well to me. But for the most part, like I hate when a pop punk band is like all these like good time songs and it's like, now is our sensitive song to show we're deep musical artists, or even worse, I also want you all to understand I love Radiohead.
Oh, like the artist says, yeah.
Well, I should clarify. When the artist needs to show you that they're also a deep musician who's just gotten into Radiohead as well as being a pop punk musician. Not my jam.
Yeah.
Not my jam.
Yeah. Rock bands have a thing where they have this one ridiculously heavy song that's just way outside their wheelhouse and they're not good at it. That happens.
Yeah. Definitely not one of my favorite things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe we should circle back to kind of what Muse Formation is about. And again, listeners, if you haven't checked out Jesse's YouTube channel, please do. It's awesome. And there was one video I really liked in particular that I should have wrote the name down for, but I think I did. Hold on. Nope, I didn't. But anyways, it's essentially what your platform is mostly about is getting from 0 to 10,000 fans, right?
Yes. So I have a playlist of 50 some odd videos that is just the subject of how to go from 0 to 10,000 fans. One of the main reasons I formed my YouTube channel was that, you know, like the people who were doing this, a lot of them were talking like, here's what this huge artist on a major label with a big management company is doing. It's like, yeah, okay, whatever, dude. People who don't know my biography, I managed a couple bands over the years that went from 0 to millions of fans. And I was with them from day one. And I mean, maybe not day one, but when they had 0 fans. And we did a lot of things to get them there. And so when I wrote my book, Get More Fans, and when I did this, I wanted to do the discussion of what actually works. And it's still a thing I do. Like I do a lot of consulting where I discuss with artist teams or artists themselves what they should be doing in particular. And, you know, the other big thing I saw is that a lot of people were selling these stupid fucking roadmaps where it's like, you just do this, this, and this. It's like, The reason that whenever you listen to a music business podcast like this or anything that you talk to somebody who's actually do this, the first thing they say is there's no blueprint. There's some things that are smart. There's some things that there's some general truths, but like I try to make my channel a lot more about what are the questions you ask about the artist to actually get to understand what to do. And for some people, that's a little too vague, but I unfortunately think that's the only real answer is that what I've seen over the years, and I've been doing this and helping break artists, whether it's as a producer, a manager, or the strategist, is you see that what it is you find what's unique about the artist and then you play it up and you figure out all the ways to iterate strengths. It's one of the same reasons. One of the things I talk about is like everybody loves talking about branding. I don't really love talking about branding because what I have found is I think it's actually much more about artists being their authentic selves and figuring out what is an iteration off that authentic thing that they are and what they actually pursue in their creative endeavors. And then how we iterate from there is what I tend to find is actually the example of what doesn't make a flash in a pan, but makes a artist that lasts a lot of years. And, the thing I work with a lot too is legacy artists that have lasted a long time. And I've gotten to see how that's done.
Yeah, that's. I think it's really important to make that distinction too, that I think what we focus on and what I feel like bands who are trying to, build these careers should be focused on is that sustained organic growth, not the flash in the pan, because that's the thing. I've watched so many, videos and read so much information on like how to blow up on here, how to get this viral video here. And these are all like really, really quick, just like virality almost is what they're going for. But it's so much more important to have that sustained growth that will, it'll basically create a legacy career for you. It'll create something that is real and people are actually interested in. God, like there are countless examples of bands who have blown up and had that virality, and where are they now? And so, but I think that's a big issue that I've noticed when I'm looking for, like videos or tutorials or things like that on how to kind of build a career. It's always, the vast majority of it seems like it's so focused on just really quick instant results. And it's just like, it's not going to sustain. So the 10,000 fans is so great. It's not like, hey, how to get, a million fans or something overnight.
Yeah. Well, a million streams, say it's like, okay, do this, you'll get a million streams. What if those people don't like you? And the next day there's no streams, right? Like a fan is a lasting relationship that's going to benefit you for as long as you're a band.
Yeah. And there's and like probably the thing that on YouTube I'm most known that as a contentious view is that I am the guy who, unlike the other YouTubers, who's like, this is not built on fucking Facebook ads. Because the fact of the matter is part of what was nice about my job at Atlantic Electra is I would talk to a lot of the artists they just signed. And I got to learn every bit of how they got to be on one of the biggest labels on earth. And what I do for a living is basically study that. And I've been studying it for a long time. And that story is not Facebook ads. And the reason that is those aren't the passionate music listeners who lift you up. What actually is the real answer is investing in community. And that's one of the biggest things I talk about. And I know that sounds like a vague thing, but what I really do see that actually helps artists is contacting other artists, making friends with them, doing cool things together, going Instagram live with them, and then trading fan bases, doing collaborative tracks if that's the right thing for your genre, and things like that. Those actually raise up things and really, really like get you a real fan base. Whereas the Facebook ads tend to be the people who are the least engaged, who are clicking on ads on Facebook, which are usually the worst type of music fan you could possibly get.
It's a good point.
I like that take.
Yeah. You said it at the beginning of the episode that musicians are like this type of person that wants to do a little bit of work and get a big result. And I think about that all the time. I'm so guilty of that. Everything I do, like literally everything I do, this podcast, being a music producer, being in rock bands growing up, even investing like in stuff is like, this could go crazy. There's always like this, like, if something crazy happened, it could be awesome. Like our podcast could blow up, maybe freaking Joe Rogan shares it or something, something weird, right? Like, or our band could just get added to some mega playlist. Like everything in my life has that element to it, and I'm actively trying to not focus on those things now because I've like caught myself in that pattern. And I think a lot of musicians fit that bill as well. I don't think I'm alone in this, that we are naturally attracted to things that could magically go huge.
Yeah.
And that's not the best. That's not a strategy at all. Actually, it's just luck, hoping on luck.
That's actually a great way of putting it. Is that is not strategy. And the funny thing is like when you read, like I think it's that book, Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow, it actually says like all of our brains are programmed to want that because we're trying to get ahead and survive. And we think like, oh, well, what if I just throw a penny in the fountain and the wish comes true and type thing. But like the real reality of it is, and truly, I will say this, there are, if like we say, even though there's lots of different goals in music, let's just say one of them is to be on a major label. 25% of the people I would see come in the door that I would talk to were lucky that they happen to know somebody, and then that person's a big electronic producer, that they sang a hook on a big song, and now they're signed because everybody loved their voice in that song. But the other 75% of it usually did really smart things and worked really hard and were obsessed with getting ahead. And like the obsession and working hard every day. Like, one of the things I always used to talk about is like, I used to manage this band Man Overboard, who a lot of what my book Get More Fans is about is when I was managing them. And there was a point when they were blowing up that like I could say this and it can sound like an exaggeration, but that's every hour of the day, either me, someone in the band, or someone at their label was working on that band, because it really was true, is that we would all be staying up all night after our regular jobs doing things to get this band ahead. And it ended up with them being like, they've been broken up for years and they're still a band with hundreds of thousands of monthly listeners on Spotify. And that's because the ripple we made was big enough to keep that ripple going from that.
Right. That's very cool. We have a private like mastermind Facebook group for our Patreon supporters.
Nice.
And I put it in there that you were coming on and people were stoked and wanted to ask some questions. So if you're cool with that.
Oh yeah.
Maybe
I'm cool.
I'll move into those. Unless Marcus, is there anything you wanted to add before we jumped into that stuff?
You know what? Yeah, there is actually something, and it's a very specific question, and I get it all the time. And I know that there's tons of resources on there right now, but I want your take on it. How do you write a pitch for Spotify?
Okay, yeah. So this is actually like now my most popular video. So I have the added help that what my girlfriend does for a living is she works at one of the biggest indie distributors and pitches playlists to playlists and features for a living. So I have a very distinct advantage in this, that I get to talk to somebody who's much smarter than me about this. But here's the thing that works, is you need to figure out what's exciting about yourself. And I always take this back to my friend Ben Wyman for the band Dillinger Escape Plan. I give credit that he always would tell me that the biggest reason that gets them through is that Ben understands what's exciting about his band and sells it like no one else. And when he first told me this, I was like, okay, buddy, yes, sounds lovely. And then I lived a few more years through the music business. I was like, oh, now that I see that Ben's pointed that out, he's 100% right that like, and this is a particular part of my life where I was working on the production team of lots of big major label records. I was like, wow, all these people's managers really get how to get people excited and get them curious to listen to something. So one of the things is find something that's exciting. It can't just be we're four dudes who love hanging and banging in Missoula, Montana. Like that's just not exciting. Aside from if you want to find out where Missoula, Montana is, which I make this joke all the time, and I have no idea. Anyway, what is exciting is, one, if you can describe your sound in a certain way. Two, if you have a quick, interesting elevator pitch. Three, a quote of somebody who's said something great about you. Cosigns are always huge. And four, like appealing to, we have to remember most of these playlists are made within micro genres. And what I mean is like that, like you're not in pop, you're in a specific type of pop. And if you can show that you're a part of that community. So for example, like a playlist like Lorem, which is very vague, but there is some sort of thread to it. It's a little bit more young, a little bit more queer, and unclassifiable. And if you could speak that language to them, that is a huge appeal to that. So that's one thing. The other thing is a concept called the curiosity gap. And so my day job, funny enough, since COVID, when my studio shut down, is I started doing a podcast for the news organization, The Daily Beast. We're one of the biggest news organizations in the world. And one of the things they do to get you to click on an article, a lot of people will call it clickbait, but there's an evolution of clickbait that's happened, which is the curiosity gap. Well, you'll probably know this from social media, which is that a lot of threads from smarter outlets are written where you go, I wonder about that, and then you click it. The curiosity gap of making people go, I wonder what that song sounds like, is what a bio and a playlist pitch often is that's successful, as people go, I don't know what that is. I may like that. So thinking about what a curiosity gap could be is another great strategy for doing a great pitch.
Yeah, that's great.
Oh, yeah. I like that. It's good too, because it's not like, write this about you. It's another it depends question, and that's what makes it so difficult. But I like that a lot. That's an interesting way to think about it. I love that. That was great.
Yeah, I mean, what I often do for people is like, if I do like a call with an artist, like I just had a friend of mine call me up and be like, I have to figure this out. I'm like, okay, there's really just 2 questions you have to answer. I want you to write it 5 different ways. What's exciting about you? And how could you describe yourself where somebody would say, oh, I want to hear what that sounds like. I don't understand what that sounds like.
Yeah. Nice.
All right. Let's jump into some questions from our Patreon supporters. First up will be Ryan Flair. Ryan asked like 3 questions, so he's going to be all over this. Okay. So first question, from starting the Muse Formation channel and Facebook groups, what do you think is the biggest mistakes up and coming artists are making? And we might have covered some of this in the episode, but
yeah, I think we did cover some of the biggest mistakes. You don't truly, I think the biggest mistake, and I'll preface this with that I think oftentimes when people ask what's the biggest mistake, what everybody's answer usually is, well, here's the correlation I've seen between the last 3 people I talked to. So the last 3 people I talked to, I think have not spent enough time figuring out kind of what we were just saying, which is like, what is your strength? What's your weakness, and what's your story? And like, I know this is like, it's not comfortable, but like one of the things I also said, like, like when COVID hit, man, like I knew so many music journalists who were out of work, and like music journalists' job really is how to make relatively the same story that happens all the time, because a lot of bands are the same story over and over again, how to tell it different. Pay a music journalist to talk to you for an hour and try to figure out what your story is. I think the biggest thing is that artists don't understand themselves at all, and I'm going to put in even the bare minimum effort to get and understand what is going to be special about them, what is the story, because often you also too, your own story is boring. I mean, I have it all the time that I tell somebody something, they're like, that's crazy. And I'm like, oh, sounds pretty boring, but it's also like a thing I lived. So it's not that exciting to me. And the other crazy thing is you usually aren't your audience. Like the thing I have to remind musicians of all the time is one of the worst parts of fame is you're usually 5 steps ahead of your audience. And that's why they like you, is you're a little smarter. You're a little bit more with it. You got a little deeper influences, and the shitty thing about that is that then, that's who's hounding you and punishing you and wants to talk to you, and you're going to be a little bored by it at times. And we have to remember that not everything is the most elevated thing. Like one of the biggest things I see in my YouTube comments is people are like, well, if I put out all those songs, I'd be like, what the fuck? They put out 3 videos for that song? I'm bored. And I'm like, yeah, most people aren't paying that much attention to you.
Yeah.
Like they're reminded of the big thing and they're like, oh, I guess I should click this now that they've reminded me 3 times. Great.
Right. Next one is kind of a joint question, again, from Ryan Flair, but also from Lucas Anthony. How would you advise up-and-coming artists of when to focus on marketing music and when to focus on just making the best songs? I think a lot of people, including myself, make the mistake of trying to market too early when maybe other processes haven't been defined or the songs don't resonate with people yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's the thing because you have to start putting things out. It's the same thing. Like I talk about it on my YouTube channel. Like, man, my early videos, I mean, I've been miking things for 30 years. I still couldn't get a fucking lav mic to work right. And my first videos, because my voice is so loud, it overloaded all of them. You got to get started. You got to be flawed. And you got to just start creating and getting stuff out in the world. Most of your favorite artists have terrible, terrible stuff out in the world if you dig deep enough. So one, there's that, but two, I think the best setup, and like, let's say I was managing a new artist, I would have them actually make a full EP and then figure out how to put the songs on it and then keep writing and maybe throw out a couple of those songs along the way. I'd basically would be about 2 months out deciding the next one, developing the content for that. But that next one may be the last song they wrote, or we may throw out that new song they wrote because it's not as good as some of the other ones that we have banked of those 6 songs. I'd want to have a 6-song runway and really keep finding out who you are. Like a thing I genuinely believe is that even if you write good songs early on, oftentimes you're going to find who you are and go on to better material. That's the usual case scenario. So, but the way you do find that good material is you're often working with other people. You learn so much every time you go in the studio with somebody else. Even if you don't go in the studio with somebody else, the mistakes you make on your own songs usually make the next ones better. So you got to just create, got to do the thing, and got to start learning from all the mistakes that happen along the way. And those mistakes happen in promotion and they happen in creating songs.
Right. Yeah, that's a great answer. Thank you. All right. Then we have Bernard Ennis asking, what's the best way to stand out from the crowd in an oversaturated market? Vague question.
yeah, but a very, very good one. So I do think that this is the thing of that when people are asked this, and I don't want to be accusatory of this person because obviously I don't know them.
He's a great guy.
I don't doubt it if he listens to this podcast. So when people are saying, how do I stand out? That 9 times out of 10, when I do some deeper digging is the answer is you're asking that because yet again, like I kind of said before, is you haven't figured out what makes you unique, but also because you haven't developed yourself yet. Now, development is like one of those words that it's like, oh God, like it can really mean a lot and a lot of bad connotations can happen with it. Cause like, Lord knows the way I see some managers go about developing means make them more generic or chase trends that they shouldn't be chasing. Like nothing worse than the person who's making Elliott Smith type stuff and the manager's like, well, dubstep might be cool, dog. That's not development. Development is figuring out what is authentic to you and your full self. A lot of times, one of the things I see is people have bigger influences than what they're playing, and they haven't figured out that they love Elvis Costello's keyboard playing on this thing, and maybe they can bring a little bit of elements of that into their metal song.
Right.
It's going deeper and figuring out more and more. Like, you know, I'm so allergic to sounding like the fucking old hippie, but like looking in yourself and finding other things you like and not being afraid of them to put them in your music, but finding how they can actually go into your music and be synergistic. And what I mean by synergistic is like that actually works and is cool within it. Is like what makes every really interesting artist is leaning into that instead of leaning away from it and just being generic, because no one needs the 9,000th band that just sounds like everybody else.
Right. Yeah. Something I think I would want to add to like standing out in the oversaturated market is that like any market is only going to get more saturated. Like that's only going in one direction, right? I mean, maybe with the exception of like country, for example, is all of a sudden a huge type of music, and like types of it didn't exist previously, so they would have been smaller back then. I guess that is proving my point. It's just getting bigger. Yep. So I think maybe you're framing the market, like what you consider the market, to be the wrong thing. Like maybe Bernard is framing the market to be rock music, and he needs to realize that he lives in a smaller kind of sea inside of the rock market, right?
A micro genre is the term I like.
Exactly. So yeah, Bernard, hope that was helpful. Okay, last question is actually from me, because you're the, like, make sure I got this right. You're the producer for the new Abnormal, right?
I am the producer, so people understand it. That's the political podcast I referred to before. I produce a podcast that's regularly in the top 10 of all 1,100,000 podcasts that are put out a year. And I produce it. And what producing a podcast means is I figure out all the content, and I even write questions, ask them, and I occasionally have to tell my hosts that they're talking about the same thing for the 5th time.
Okay, first off, that's insane, man. Like, you're a part of something that's really, truly massive when you're working on that show. Like you said, it's one of the biggest podcasts in the world. So that's crazy, man. Well done.
It is one of the weirdest things that has ever happened to me in my entire life, because I will say this, that like, I was saying I lost my job at Atlantic Electra right before or as COVID hit. And then 1 week into COVID, that became my new job. It was developing that from the start, and it's just been wild. And and especially it seems, tomorrow we get rid of Donald Trump in America. So our podcast agenda was that, and it seems we've done it.
Yeah. Wild. The reason I bring it up is, one, it's a very cool fun fact about you that you're like the producer for this giant podcast, but also one of the podcasts I listened to that you were a guest on, I should say, you had just like a lot of advice for people doing podcasting. Mm-hmm. And that's what Marcus and I are doing, of course. And then you're also doing really well in the YouTube realm, I see, as well. I just respect everything you do. So I wanted to ask you what your thought is on podcasts moving into the YouTube realm.
My thought is that every podcast should move into the YouTube realm, because one, what you see is that search for podcasts is terrible. Now, I know Apple and Spotify are trying to figure this out, but we might be a year or two from there, and you don't want to wait for these two tech behemoths who barely prioritize that subject to actually do it. And then two, so like what I find works best about YouTube is that people search people's names, and then your podcast comes up, and then they subscribe to you. But secondly, people are going to be consuming podcasts through all sorts of mediums. YouTube subscriptions, where you can listen without having to have the screen on, are going through the roof. It's going to be one and the same. Joe Rogan really, apparently through the data I've read, has really brought people on to actually watching podcasts. I am not one of them. But it is the future of podcasting, and I think the sooner everybody gets there, especially guest-based podcasts. So an interesting thing with guest-based podcasts is that it's where the most growth happens, and doing any other podcast that's not guest-based is one of the hardest things you can actually grow. And nearly one of the presidents of Pushkin, which is one of the biggest podcast companies, told me that they basically set $1 million on fire marketing podcasts. They tried everything in the book. Nothing did anything. But having hosts on other podcasts and having guests on their own podcasts can do more than what $30,000 can do in growth.
Right. Very cool. Little side question off of that. Are you kind of saying that even if you don't have a visual aspect, and by visual, I mean like we don't have the Joe Rogan camera set up kind of thing going on, still just get it on there?
That's exactly what I'm saying. Is that what we do? For example, I do a musician podcast called Killed by Desk that I produce, where we interview people who have moved on from making music about what they do for a living now. And
it's a great topic.
Oh, it's such a fun podcast, and the guys who host it are hilarious. And but we just put up the guests, and even if it's sometimes 17 plays on the YouTube video, like 9 of those will be people who email like, "Oh, I subscribed after I searched for that. This is the best thing I've ever heard."
Right.
And it's just so funny that the conversion can be that high. And aside from that, even just some of the ones I've consulted for, it really is the interesting thing is that people who would search that out on YouTube are the people who are looking for more podcasts. So it's a really good demographic. And I find, like I make them, and it's like I basically throw up a single screen image at the end of the night on DaVinci Resolve. I hit render while I go to bed, and when I wake up in the morning, I take the 4 minutes to post it. It takes 5 minutes to do it per episode.
Right. Cool, man. Okay. Well, thank you so much. That's great advice, and appreciate the insight. And thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. We really appreciate it. It was an awesome conversation having you here.
I really appreciate being on.
Yeah, this is one of those things, and because it's evolving so quickly, it's just one of those topics that we could talk about forever, and we could touch on so many different aspects of it. It's hard to kind of cram it all into, like a digestible episode. So I think this would be another one. If you're into it, we would love to have you come back and we could dig into some other topics.
Literally anytime y'all want to have me, I am psyched to be on. It is so hard for me to ever find content like this that's actually good. So when I tuned into that first one I heard that you guys did with Spirit Box, and it was actually a good conversation, I was fucking thrilled.
Oh, awesome.
That's awesome.
Thank you. Thank you. Man, those guys are killing it. They had the number one freaking metal song of the year on like Octane or something. No, I can't remember which station it was, but it's just insanity. So cool.
I followed them on Twitter, and when I see the success they're having, it's like fucking awesome, because totally deserved. They're smarter than most bands.
Absolutely. Yeah.
For sure.
So cool to see. Okay, the last thing for us to do is just, is there anywhere you would like us to point our listeners? I'll throw links into our show notes, of course, and stuff like
JesseKen.com is my main thing.
There we go. Perfect. Check it out. Nice. Jesse is a great resource for you. Check out his YouTube channel, Museformation, as well. There's just a whole, like you said, there's like 50 videos. There's a rabbit hole of information. You'll come out on the other side a better musician. All right. Then, thank you, Jesse. Appreciate it again. And we'll definitely be in touch soon.
Awesome.
Thanks,
appreciate it. Great chatting, guys.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Bye. Thanks, man.
Okay. Hopefully you enjoyed that episode. Actually, I'm sure you did, because Jesse Cannon is an absolute legend and one of the smartest dudes on this stuff. What a pleasure having the opportunity to talk to him. That was great.
Yeah, it was awesome. It takes so much research to amass even just like a little bit of knowledge on this stuff. You know what I mean? So it's incredible to hear someone like him just talk about it. Like the amount of research that's gone into this stuff that, that he can talk about is insane.
Absolutely.
And so cool to just get it in like little digestible, long form conversations.
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely. We could have gone on for hours, I'm sure. And I'm sure we will in the future. So let's do a Patreon shout out for our top tiered Patreon members. If you haven't checked this out already, we do have 3 tiers of Patreon membership, and you should totally check them out. There's some really dope perks in there. And the top tier gets you a shout out on our podcast. So here are those supporters. First up, we got Evan of the Wild Romantics, Chris from Scove, Bernard from the Enrons, Ryan from Venom and Spirit, Grady from Leather Apron Revival, Lucas from Vogue Villains, Graham from Carmana, Kevin from Supreme Remedy, Rob from Rob Elo, and Tay Fance, as well as Carlin from Mulligan. Thank you all very much. We appreciate the support, and we will be back with another episode next week.